Hey everyone, welcome to Festive Tech Calendar 2023. I'm Marc Duiker. I'm a senior developer advocate at Digrid, and at Digrid we build products that help developers to build and run distributed applications at scale. And I'm here to talk about the Santa Claus workflow. So Santa Claus is using Dapr to ensure everyone gets their Christmas gift on time. He has a large team of elves who are responsible for different tasks such as making toys, wrapping gifts, and loading the sleigh. Each task is an activity that can be executed by one or more elves, and Santa needs to coordinate the activities of all the elves in a reliable and efficient way. That's where Dapr Workflow comes in. So Santa defines his workflow in code. He prefers C#, but Python or Java also can be used. And he specifies the sequence of activities in that workflow. And Dapr Workflow then takes care of the orchestration logic, fault tolerance, and scalability of the workflow, so Santa can focus on the business logic and is assured of optimal elf efficiency. Now let's have a look at the workflow overview itself before we actually run it and dive into the code. So this is the Santa Claus workflow. That's the main workflow that we're starting with. So the input of that workflow is a list of wishes, and that list of wishes contain then the name and a type of gift that that person wishes. Then we'll iterate over that list, and then for each wish in that list, we will start a child workflow. And in this case, it's the Christmas wish workflow. And the first activity in that Christmas wish workflow is the naughty or nice activity. So this activity will determine if the person is on the naughty or nice list. If they're on the naughty list, then the workflow will immediately end, so no gifts there. If the person is on the nice list, then the workflow will continue. And the first next step is then the register wish activity. So here a notary elf will put a record in the database for this person and what type of gift they want. And it will also create a unique gift ID. The next activity will be assign workbench activity, because a physical workbench needs to be prepared and assigned for the work that the elves will do, because the gift need to be prepared, need to be built, and need to be wrapped. Then, depending on the gift type, another child workflow will be executed. In this case, there are like three options. The gift type is either a book, and then the book workflow will be scheduled. It can be a wooden toy, so the wooden toy workflow will be scheduled. Or the gift type can be Catalyst Early Access, which means the early access workflow will be executed. Once that specific gift workflow is completed, then this Christmas gift workflow will continue with the wrap activity, because all of the gifts need to be wrapped. And then the final activity in this Christmas gift workflow is the put gift in sleigh activity, because otherwise it can't be delivered. Then the Christmas gift workflow is completed, and then it goes back to the main Santa Claus workflow, and there's just one activity in there, and that's called deliver gifts activity, because that's a responsibility of Santa. And then the main workflow is completed. The stuff that I'll be running now and I'll be showing is in Digrid Labs Santa Claus workflow. So you can check out or fork this repo and just run everything yourself if you want. I'll switch over to VS Code right now. And I'll be using CodeTour to actually give like a guided tour through this solution. So CodeTour is a VS Code extension, and well, you see what it can do. There's a bit of information in there, which is also in the README, so I'll skip that. If you want to run this locally, in this case you need like the .NET 7 SDK, because this is a web project built on .NET 7. You need Docker Desktop, because that's what you need for the Dapr CLI. You need to install the Dapr CLI, and finally you need a REST client, because there's a web application and you call an endpoint to start the workflow. And we will use, again, another endpoint in the Dapr API to actually get the status of this workflow. So if we want to run this locally, we first need to do a .NET build. So let's start with that. We do a .NET build. Okay, everything is built. That's good. And then we use a Dapr CLI to start this application. And in this case, I'm running a Dapr multi-app run, where by using run-f and a dot, I specify it to read a Dapr configuration file, and it reads that configuration file and it starts the applications which are written in that configuration file. In this case, it's just one application. So I will run this. So this will start the web application, and it will also start the Dapr process, so we can talk to the Dapr API. All right, so my app is running, and the Dapr process is also running, so now I can start the first endpoint, which will start the main workflow. So I'm also using another VS Code extension called the REST client, and that allows me to write these .http files where I specify some variables and I specify what kind of methods I'm going to call with a post. In this case, I'm going to call the application URL and the start endpoint there, and I'll provide a payload, which is just this JSON payload, and this contains 3 elements. So these are the gift input or the wish input types, which is a name and what type of gift they want. So Alex wants a wooden toy, Renee would like a book, and Robin wants Catalyst Early Access. I'll explain what it is pretty soon. All right, so let's start this. I've put a lot of console log statements in the code, so we'll see a lot of log statements passing by. And once this is done, we will actually verify what the output is of this workflow. Okay, so I'm going to run this now. I'm going to click this send request link here. Again, this functionality is there because I'm using the REST client in VS Code. And then on the right-hand side, the output will appear of calling this endpoint. So, okay, so I get back a 200 OK, and I get back a GUID, and we see lots of stuff happening here. So this GUID is the instance ID of the workflow that I've started. And here we can see all of the console log outputs that I've put in there. I'll just wait a bit so we see stuff being wrapped, stuff being picked up and put in a sleigh. And this is the final statement. So this is the final activity in the main workflow where gifts are being delivered. So now it's done. So if you scroll up a bit, not that far, we will see what kind of stuff has been done. The activity is called to check if the person is on the naughty or nice list. Then the gifts are being registered for them. Then the workbenches are being assigned. And then the part will start where the workflow is dependent on the type of gift. So in this case, indeed, the book content and length is determined. The other workflow will actually get a Catalyst Early Access link. I see here that parts are being collected. That's for the wooden toy. Okay, so we see that pages are being written for the book, right? Because the elves are not ordering a book at Amazon. No, the elves will actually write a new book. So pages are being written, and pages are probably also being bound into a book somewhere. Yeah, that also happens. All right, so there's a lot of stuff happening, and it's good that Santa doesn't need to give the instructions manually to his elves anymore, but that's all coordinated by Dapr Workflow now. So this workflow also has an output, but what we got back here was just an ID, and this is the ID of the instance of the workflow that has been running, and we can use this output to get the status of the workflow. So that's the other endpoint that we're going to call now. So let's close this. So before I actually called the application and the starting point of the application, but now I'm going to call directly into the Dapr process. So I'm going to call the Dapr URL and then accessing the workflows endpoint, which is in beta, and it's the Dapr implementation of the workflow. So we're using the Dapr Workflow engine, and here I specify the instance ID that we got back once we started the workflow. Okay, so I make this GET request, and then we get back the status of the workflow. All right, so that's now here on this part. And what we get back is, again, the instance ID. We get back the name of the workflow. We see that the runtime status is completed. And then we see the input of that instance. So this should look familiar. So Alex wanted a wooden toy, Renee wanted a book, and Robin wanted Catalyst Early Access. And this is the output. So for each of the specific gifts, a message was returned. So for the wooden toy workflow, the message is the wooden toy is ready for Alex. And for the book workflow, we have this output. The book is ready for Renee. And for Robin that wanted Catalyst Early Access, we have, hi Robin, here's the link to get early access to Direct Catalyst, which is the latest product that we are building at Catalyst, which is basically Dapr as a service. All right. We have started the workflow, we've seen a lot of log statements, what's going on, and we've seen also the output now of the workflow. So let's have a look at the code now. So let's have a look at the project. So again, I'm going to close this because this is a bit big. I will also show this so you can see in which file we are. So let's start with the CS project file. So this is the Santa Claus Workflow CS project file. You can see it's a web application. We're using .NET 7, and we are using just one package here. It's called Dapr Workflow. So if you want to use Dapr Workflow, you need to use one of the client SDKs to actually create or to write the workflow in code. So in case of C#, you need a reference to this NuGet package, Dapr Workflow. All right, then let's go to the program CS file. So here we see like a couple of extension methods related to Dapr. This one is the most important one if you are writing your workflows and activities. It's the add Dapr Workflow extension method. And what you need to specify in here is you need to register which workflows and activities you have written in this web application. So in this case, I have like some main workflows, which then call into child or sub workflows. So this is my list of workflows, and this is my list of activities, which is quite a lot because of the different workflows that I'm using. I've also used add Dapr Workflow client because in this web application, I am also using the Dapr SDK to start the workflow. So we'll see that in a bit. And the top one, this add Dapr client, you don't need it for Dapr Workflow, but I'm also using one of the other Dapr APIs, and that's the state management API, because I'm also writing some state to the state store. So that's why I have the Dapr client here added as well. Okay, so if we move down a bit in the CS project file, we see that we get an instance of this Dapr Workflow client from the service provider. And this workflow client is then used in where we actually create a method where we actually map a post to a start endpoint where we get the input array as wishes. And here we see that we use the workflow client to schedule a new workflow, and we pass it in a name. It's a Santa Claus workflow, and we pass in the array of wishes. And what we get back is the instance ID of that workflow. So this method kicks off the workflow, and then the Dapr workflow engine takes over and then continues with scheduling that workflow. Okay, so let's move now over to the main Santa Claus workflow. So that's this one. So it's just a .NET class. You inherit from a base type, from a workflow base type. That's in this Dapr.workflow NuGet package. And there you specify what is the input type of this workflow and what is the output type of the workflow. So the input type is in this case an array of Christmas wish input that contains the name and the gift type that person wants. And the output is string because that will be like a message that comes from one of the other child workflows. So if you inherit from this base type workflow, you need to implement the run async method. So this is the main method that actually contains your business logic for the workflow that calls out to other activities. And you'll have the workflow context there, and you will also have the same input as you specified here as well. So the Christmas input. So what happens here? We prepare a list of tasks, because we get an array of wishes as our input, and we want to execute the Christmas wish workflow for each of that wishes in this array. So what we do is we do a for each of the wish in the wishes. We will create a task of calling a child workflow, because the Christmas wish workflow is another workflow that we want to call from this Santa Claus workflow. So we create a task to call this child workflow that has a specific output, and this is the name of the workflow, and then the input is the wish. So that is a single item of this Christmas wish input. Now we are not awaiting this call child workflow, so we're not waiting here immediately until it is finished. We just have a task that describes this execution or scheduling of this workflow. So we're adding the task to this list of tasks. So in this case, we have an array of 3 elements, but this list could also be like 300 or 3000. And then this is the line where actually all of those sub workflows or child workflows gets executed, but also the main Santa Claus workflow will actually wait until all of these child workflows have been completed. So we do like await task when all, and then the workflow engine will schedule all of the child workflows, and this main workflow will wait until everything is ready. So what happens then in this main workflow is as soon as the other workflows have been completed, then it can continue to the final part of this main workflow, and that's the deliver gifts activity. And what gets returned from the main workflow is then each of these Christmas wish workflows has a message as an output, a string as an output. And here I'm just concatenating all of these messages into an array, and that's the output of the Santa Claus workflow. All right, so let's go to the first child workflow. So that's the Christmas wish workflow. Again, you see we inherit from the base class. We see that the input is like now a single Christmas wish input, and it has a single Christmas wish output. Right, so the first thing that that's being called here is an activity, and that's the naughty or nice activity. So that takes input, which basically contains the name of the person, and we get back. This is the input, which is the name of the person, and this is the output, the naughty or nice output. So what happens in this activity? Well, yeah, there's a lot of complicated business logic here. Before I show that, so this is how you define an activity. Again, it's just a .NET class where you inherit from workflow activity in this case, and you specify the input of the activity and the output of the activity. Again, you need to override the run async method. You now have a workflow activity context, which I'm not using here in this case, and we specify the input. In most of these activities, I do like a thread sleep, so it looks a bit more interesting when we do the console log thing. Of course, don't do this in production code. And in this case, everyone is nice. I mean, I'm not a bad person, so I think it's nice that everyone is on the nice list here. All right, so let's go back to the Christmas wish workflow. Here we look at the output of this activity, of the naughty or nice activity. We check if the person is naughty, which in this case will never happen because I fixed the output to nice. But if they are naughty, then we immediately return a Christmas wish output, and we do not continue with the execution of the rest of this workflow. If this is not the case, then we will continue with the next activity, and that's the register wish activity. So that's this part. So what will happen here is a notary elf will then register the person and their wish in Santa's database. So let's have a look here, because here in this activity, we actually use the Dapr client, as you can see here, and we use dependency injection to use the Dapr client here. And what happens here is we create a new gift ID. So we register this gift ID for this person and the gift type. And here we're using the Dapr client to actually save this information. So you're accessing a state store state component where this is the key. So the key is the name, and then the value that belongs to the key is in this case the gift type. So the type what they want and the gift ID. And this is just to make sure that we have the proper administration to track all of the gifts that has been processed. Okay, so let's go back to the Christmas wish workflow, and the next activity there is the assign workbench activity, right? So there is a floor manager elf that will assign a workbench where the gift will be made and wrapped and so on. So that's happening here, and the output of it is contains then an ID of that workbench. So the next part is very specific to the gift. So what we have here is a dictionary, and I will go to the definition of the dictionary. So it's a dictionary where the key is a gift type and the value is a string, and that's the name of the workflow that will execute. So it's just a map between the gift type of book. So if you want a book, then we execute the book workflow. If you want a wooden toy, we want to execute the wooden toy workflow. And if you want Catalyst Early Access, we will execute the Catalyst Early Access workflow. So you put in the gift type, you get back the workflow name that needs to be run for that. And that will happen in this part. So again, we will call a child workflow, which we extracted from this map. That will have gift workflow output. And also a generic gift workflow input where we specify the gift ID and the name and the workbench ID where the work will take place. And this workflow will wait until that specific workflow has been completed. And then it will continue to the wrap gift activity. So this is like an activity that needs to be executed for all of the different types of gifts. So that's why it's in this Christmas wish workflow. So once this has been completed and the gift is wrapped, then it needs to be transported to the sleigh. So then there is a put gift in sleigh activity as well. And finally, we return an output, and that's the message of the specific gift workflow. We return it back to the main Santa Claus workflow. All right, so let's look into the first gift-specific workflow. That's the book workflow. So this is it. Again, it's inheriting from the base type, and we use this generic gift workflow input and gift workflow output. And the first thing that gets done here is a team of elves will brainstorm about the content of the book and how big the book is, right? Because I mentioned before, we're not just buying a book. The book is actually being created in the workshop here. So if we just peek in this determined book content activity, there's nothing much happening, of course. But in this case, we decide how big the book will be. So we randomize the number of pages, and that will be part of the output. So let's get back to the book workflow. So this part is a fan out, fan in, because depending on how many pages of the book there are, that those pages need to be written, right? And this is a bit old-fashioned, right? Things are not like printed, but there's actually a bunch of elves involved, each writing one page of the book. So what will happen now is we will loop over the pages of the book, and then we will actually call the write page activity, and one elf will dedicate their time to actually write one page of the book. So if you have like 100 pages, then we'll have like 100 write page activities. Tasks will be defined for these write page activities here, and they will get collected in this list. And at this line, that's the moment where all of these tasks will be scheduled. So all of the elves will be informed to write all these pages. And this book workflow will actually not continue until all of those pages have been written. All right, so once all of the pages are done, then those pages need to be bound into a book. So that's the next part where a bookbinder elf will actually bind those pages together. Right, and finally we have the return message, which is different for each specific gift workflow. In this case, it says the book is ready for, and whatever the input name was. Let's move over to the next type, and that's the wooden toy workflow. So the wooden toy workflow is the same thing, the same base class and the same input and output methods. And the first activity that's being executed here is parts need to be looked up for the wooden toy to be prepared, right? So there will be an elf managing the inventory database, and it will run a query to identify the parts of a wooden toy that need to be built. So what the output will be in this case, let's actually go to this activity. So it's the lookup parts activity. And what will happen here is we'll randomly decide how many parts this wooden toy will have. So that's in this parts range. So it will have between 1 and 14 parts. Then we generate part IDs. And then we actually save it using the Dapr client again to a state store where the key is the workbench ID. And then we have all of the part IDs as the value. So this is to instruct the elves so that they know where the part IDs need to be delivered. And what the output is then the part IDs. All right, so let's get back to this. So we have a list of part IDs now, and then we are again looping over the part IDs of this wooden toy. And again, what we do here is a fan out, fan in again. So we have defined a activity that needs to be done for all of these parts, right? Because each of the parts needs to be collected. So many elves will be involved in that. Tasks are made to collect the parts. Here, we will actually wait until all of the tasks have been completed. That means all of the parts have been collected and brought to the workbench. So once all of the parts are there, then it can be assembled. So there's a construction elf that will help with actually assemble the wooden toy based on all the parts. And then another elf will paint the toy because then this paint toy activity will be called. And the last part of this wooden toy workflow is returning a message back to the Christmas wish workflow, and that's the wooden toy is ready for this person. Okay, so let's move to the final workflow, and it's the Catalyst Early Access workflow. This one is the most basic of all. It's a workflow with just one activity. And here a Dapr elf will actually send you a link that you can use to leave your contact details. And this will get you early access for Dapr Catalyst. All right, so let's run this thing one more time because it's just fun to watch the output. So we've already built it, so we can just run it again. There we go. Okay, so now our application is up and running. So now let's make a call again to start the main Santa Claus workflow. Again, with the same payload as before. So let's run it. So it's okay. So we can see things are being assigned, things are being collected, pages are being written. It's a lot of pages this time. Things are being painted, the books is being bound, gifts are being picked up and put in the sleigh. Another gift is being wrapped. And finally, we have delivering the gifts. So that's the end. So again, let's check then the output. So let's make a get to this endpoint. And here we see that indeed the workflow is completed. And this is the input and this is the output. And again, I highly recommend you to click on this link and to leave your contact details there if you want to try out Dapr as a service. So if you want to try this out yourself, go to Dapr/Santa Claus workflow. Thank you very much for watching my session and enjoy the other festive tech content. Bye-bye.